Luxury in the 1980s. There was perhaps no better time for over-the-top luxury than this period of teased-out hair and leg warmers. Well, maybe the 1970s, but the 1980s were still cool, and Oldsmobile was hip in the 1980s, despite what you might think. For while Oldsmobile would later introduce the 1990s an ad campaign saying that they were no longer producing your father's Oldsmobile was actually a pretty sweet ride. And nothing more exemplifies the sweet rides than the 1980s era Oldsmobile Torados, and particularly the Toronado Calientes. The Caliente was a trim package introduced in the final years of the third generation Oldsmobile Toronado that was produced from 1979 to 1985. Oldsmobile during this time frame had a couple different special editions. One was the Caliente, and the other was the XSC that was a special edition produced from 1980 to 1981. Perhaps Oldsmobile introduced these trims just to jazz up the Toronado a little bit. After all, it had downsized the Toronado quite considerably from the 1978 model, and the vehicle lost about 1,000 pounds in that transition. Is that 1978 Toronado, which was produced effectively from 1971 to 78, was getting, shall we say, a little inclined to corpulence late in its life. That Toronado measured about 220 inches in overall length compared to the newer Toronado that was introduced in 1979 that measured 206 inches. And while for some bigger generally meant better when it came to vehicles, this 1979 to 1985 Toronado was actually a hit in the sales rooms and provided quite a bit of success for Oldsmobile. But let's now focus on that Toronado Caliente from 1984 to 1985 and a specific option that you may never have heard of on these vehicles, and that is the lamb's wool shearling seats. Yes, I said that right. Lamb's wool shearling seats that you could get as an option in your Toronado Caliente. Now take a look as we swing the door open on this particular 1985 Oldsmobile Toronado Caliente, and you'll see that this vehicle is equipped with the optional lamb's wool shearling seats. Notice the insert there in the seat on both the bottom as well as the back. And as I said, this was an option only on the Calientes. The Calientes came standard with leather seating areas, as the brochure aptly pointed out. By this point, I believe General Motors and other auto companies had been sued because they had been advertising so-called leather seats, but the entire seat was not made of leather, just the area that you touched. The rest of it was vinyl, and so they started putting in the brochures that the seats were not full leather, but instead had leather seating areas. In any case, you can see here these beautiful lamb's wool shearling seats that were optional on the Caliente for the 1984 and 1985 model years, the only model years that the Caliente was available on this third generation Toronado. I'm admittedly not exactly sure what caused Oldsmobile designers to think that these types of seats just were the perfect item for the Toronado, but I do think that they're super cool. And this was a time where, for whatever reason, General Motors designers were experimenting with different types of seat material other than the typical cloth and leather. I suppose by this point, they were just growing tired of it. And so you had things like this, these lamb's wool shearling seats or suede seats in other vehicles like the Pontiac 6000. And I think that overall it was kind of a good idea. The problem, though, I believe with these lamb's wool shearling seats is that the wool didn't wear nearly as well as leather or cloth, for example, and it kind of looked matted down after a while, not as luxurious as one would have hoped. Of course, when they were new, these seats were likely supremely comfortable and the wool had a very soft and luxurious hand to it. Maybe it's something that'll come back even nowadays, as leather is starting to become passé in car interiors because it's pretty much ubiquitous and it doesn't even look or feel like leather anymore. It's so overtreated for durability that designers are once again discovering various fabrics and maybe alternative materials as well for interiors. And here's a view of the four-place rear seat on this 85 Oldsmobile Toronado Caliente. And you can see that this would have been a cool place to be to sit in your lamb's wool comfort back here. Someone has added a center high mounted stoplight there in the back. That was not standard equipment on the 85 Tornados, as that requirement wouldn't have been introduced as a safety standard for another couple years. And while this area here in the back of the 85 Toronado looks a bit cozy, and it is, It actually had more interior room than the previous generation Toronado, if you can believe it, the one from 71 to 78. So passengers got a bit more space to spread out in back here. Now, apart from the lamb's wool seats, these Tornados also had pretty nice and luxurious interiors, especially for the time. You can see here the instrument panel has that, well, we'll call it luxurious feel. That is admittedly faux wood grain. It is not real. But you did have the option of a digital dash, which this particular vehicle has. And I think the faux wood grain overall looks tasteful. With your Caliente, you got the 3-spoke sports steering wheel that was leather wrapped. Ooh. And the General Motors aficionado will notice that this particular Toronado has the Delco Bose music system. This was the time frame in which GM was forming its relationship with Bose. And you can tell that by take a look at the door panel, these big speaker bulges, and also the silver face on the radio that would say symphony sound. We'll take a look at that in one more second. These Bose radios were decent for the time. I wouldn't say that they were super great. They did have great treble, but not great bass, at least in my opinion. And they were a bit ridiculed during the time period. Some people said, no highs, no lows, it must be Bose. That was their joking tagline for the radio systems. But I think they sounded pretty good, although I will say that the standard Delco ETR radios, particularly the ones that had the 5-band graphic equalizers, actually were wonderful sounding radios, frankly way better than the radios that we get in cars today that kind of sound like crap. And here's a closer look at that radio. You notice, as I said, it has that silver faceplate. That's one of the telltale signs for the Delco Bose radios. And strangely, on the Delco Bose radios, they didn't have a 5-band graphic equalizer, but you could get that on other GM ETR or electronic tuning radios. This Toronado also has the Temp-matic control system above the radio there, which is a semi-automatic climate control. You control the fan speed and the mode. You notice that there's an upper slider for the mode, and by this point, GM had a pretty common format for those modes. You had the air conditioning modes on the left, max, normal, and bi-level, then the economy modes, vent and heat, and then the defrost mode, and then on the bottom, you set the temperature, and that really was the automatic part of the climate control, was that the car would adjust the temperature appropriately based on where you had set it. It wasn't a fully automatic climate control that controlled not only the temperature of the air outlets, but the mode door, in other words, where the air was coming out, and the fan speed. Those latter two operations you had to control yourself. And it probably drove the designers nuts, but it was cost effective. You notice the French seam stitching here on the instrument panel top pad that goes around the vent as well. That was fake. Yes, that was also fake, and it was molded into the instrument panel top pad. I'm sure the designers wanted real stitching, but those beam counters had to save some money, as they always do, and I think it looks good. I don't know that I would have lamented the fact that it wasn't real stitching, but hey, who am I to say that? I'm just a finance guy. And here's a closer look at the driver's door panel. Notice that huge speaker bulge. The Bose radios had amplifiers that were attached to the speakers, and so they took up a bit more space than the standard speakers, and that's one of the ways that you can tell these Bose-equipped vehicles. And also notice on this car that it has memory seats. You can see the 6-way power adjustment, and then behind that is a 2-position memory seat that was optional equipment on these Toronado Calientes. You'll also notice there are only 2 window rocker switches, although it looks like this car should have 4 windows that lowered. Only 2 do on these vehicles. So I have to ask, if you were going to order a 1984 to 85 Oldsmobile Toronado Caliente, would you have bought those sheepskin shearling seats? I think I would have. It would have been pretty cool. Now, we'll cover this 79 to 85 generation Toronado in another video and another day, but these actually are pretty nice vehicles to drive, especially the early ones, if you can get one equipped with a 350 cubic inch V8 that I believe made around 170 horsepower. They're relatively sprightly for the time, and they ride very, very well. They have 4-wheel independent suspension, just like the Cadillac Eldorado and Seville and the Riviera as well. And the ride on these is super smooth. GM actually did a very, very nice job with the ride. And even after the 350 went away, there was the Olds 307, which was not a bad engine, just wasn't nearly as peppy under hood. And of course, you could get one with the Oldsmobile diesel. Now, that one you might want to stay away from unless you love just the nostalgia of hearing a diesel clattering away under hood. But these 79 to 85 Tornados were fun cars, and they're good classics. You can still buy them. They're quite affordable, and they're around. So you find one at a good price, I wouldn't recommend passing it up. In any case, hope you enjoyed this spotlight on the 84 to 85 Oldsmobile Toronado Caliente with these super cool seats. If you did, drop a comment in the comment section. What do you think about them? And be sure to like this video. Thanks again for watching.